Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us in this very Sunday. Fernando Galán, joining today to give the session. And he's a very dear person for us at GSF because he was already many years ago, well, not so many years ago, uh, president of the European Student Union. He was also part of the student movement at the national level in Spain. And since then, he's been working on different positions um, in the educational sector. He's been working at the European level, but also he's been working for the rector unions in Spain, and now he's currently working for the University of Granada for the consortium that works towards the European University Alliances, the Arqus. So without any other further ado, I'm gonna give him the floor. And Fernando, if you need anything, we are here to support with any technical issues. Thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Sep. And thank you very much, all the rest of the participants today. After 2 years of pandemic, we all know there are always some technical issues. We were having just for the last couple of days a hybrid meeting here, and we had the Minister of Spain waiting for 20 minutes because we could not connect the audio. So we all know what that means still after 2 years of pandemic. So if it is all right, I will share my screen with some slides I've prepared. Sorry for Carmen and for Seb, because probably they have seen already some of them. But obviously, I think there are some things that it's worth to go over. Can you see my screen now? Yes. Perfect. That's great. So yeah, I've been asked to talk a little bit about quality of higher education, recognition, and internationalization or international mobility. For me, mobility is just a tool, and I will explain you why. And it is great that this is framed within the GSF Academy, because there are many things that sometimes we discuss in depth, but internationalization is like the little brother. Even when I was working in ESU, in the European Student Union, internationalization is regarded as a little thing that we do aside of everything else. But also I think that's not the case, or should not be the case. And I will just explain you a little bit why. If I go too fast, if you cannot hear me properly or whatsoever, please feel free to ask me, to interrupt me at any point. And I will try to go slower or faster, or trying to speak a little bit louder. So feel free to tell me at any given point. So first of all, the concept of universities and where they were for. And we had two models here, and we have experienced that many times. The medieval model that was created in Europe, and within Europe, even there were two main models. The model from Bologna or Padova, where are now 800 years old, or the model from Paris. In Padova, there were a group of students that wanted to learn something, and they hired professors for learning. So there were a group of, as I said, interested citizens that wanted to learn, and what they wanted is like, okay, let's get this professor that is knowledgeable about this area, and let's get him, in this case, because normally it was male dominated, to teach us about the issue we want to learn. The model from Paris was completely different. It was a group of professors that they felt they had something to offer to society, to their students back then, and they organized themselves to actually offer this knowledge. So we have these two models in Europe, and obviously the one from Bologna ceased to exist to some extent, but I wanted to highlight because it's a very interesting model in terms of what we need to learn and why, and how we participate in that process of learning. Also because the universities back then were very international. They were organized from people coming from all over Europe to learn that the area that they will be interested in, that they will travel all the way, for example, from Spain to Bologna or to Padova to learn at that particular university. Obviously, this was something for a very few, but that it was also very international since the very beginning. So these two concepts of students at the center, trying to see what they want to learn, or even the professors at the center, but also with the aim of, okay, we have something to offer to society. And on the other hand side, the way of, okay, an international group of both students and teachers for a purpose. And we will discuss that purpose a little bit later. So the first question, and maybe you have gone through it already through the different lessons of the academy, is what we have higher education for. We have higher education, and we have here four main purposes. And you can define it, or people might define it in different ways. You have higher education for educating active citizens that will play a role in society, in their societies as democratic students that participates in elections and believe in democracy and rule of law, that cares about the environment, cares about the climate, cares about the society, and the ones that are less of, and really creating volunteering and bringing everybody together for a better society. Then on the right-hand side, you have students as part of the labor market. So higher education, educating the workers of tomorrow. That was the case, it has been the case many times in the Anglo-Saxon system, where universities were mainly educating bureaucrats to get the government to work. But also nowadays is more socioeconomic in terms what are the needs of the businesses, what are the needs of the companies, and therefore we rearrange the education systems according to those needs. Also with the whole discourse of unemployment, and there is even huge pressures from the students themselves in terms of, I want my education to be useful for me, just in terms of being able to find a job later on. So that's another of the purpose that was defined for higher education. Then on the left and bottom side, you have just personal development, and you will probably hear about people that went to university that just because they wanted to learn something, even at their elderly age, where they went back to university just because they felt, okay, this is interesting for me, I want to learn more. And last but not least, on the bottom right corner, you have research and innovation in terms of higher education, broadening up the knowledge base. So getting to know more that we actually have, broadening those horizons of knowledge, going beyond what we know now. And there is a very delicate equilibrium, a very delicate balance between these purposes of higher education. And even this equilibrium is not the same. If you ask students, maybe they will tend to agree more to the left side in terms of active citizens and curiosity-driven studying. If you ask a business or a government, maybe they are more intent towards the right side in terms of educating workers of tomorrow, broadening the knowledge base. But none of the fourth is completely disregarded for any of the stakeholders. But this is a little bit of a delicate balance in terms where you put the focus on. And even throughout history, throughout the different times, you will see that the point is given to different directions. For those of you who have been in the student movement for long, you will have seen, for example, after 2008, after the world crisis, economic crisis, there was a huge look at unemployment. So there was a whole discourse about getting students ready for work. Nowadays in Europe, for example, having a work back in our backyard, let's say, now there is a whole discourse again in terms of educating active citizens. So as you can see, even for the same stakeholder, you can see that the purpose will be focused into one or another. And that brings us also to what we understand by quality of higher education. And you can see again that there's a little bit of a balance. A balance in terms of who is paying for it. And normally in the most part of the world are public authorities. So it's public money going into higher education, but many times you have also a private sector, either because of fundraising or because a student having large fees to pay for. So quality in terms also of accountability. Okay, I'm putting money into this, so I want this to be worth it. Quality could be also understand, as you see in the bottom left, into I design something and I want the output of this design. Sorry for it. Now you can see it. And I want the result of this design to be as I plan it. Completely as I plan it. No more, no less, just as I plan it. So this is also a concept of quality. This is a very much engineering approach. And you will see that many people work in quality of higher education are even engineers. And that's precisely because they have this concept into their education, which you may share or not, but this is another concept of quality. Then you have quality as seeking excellence, and you have the burger example. In terms of quality control, you could have McDonald's. So all the burgers in McDonald's are the same. And as far as are the same as they were designed, so the client will get what they are paying for, everybody's happy. If you get the second burger in terms of excellence, of another type of a concept of a restaurant, let's say, where we try to improve it, where we try to do it every time better. And then you have another model, which is this transformative concept of quality, so that we grow as it goes. So it's not just seeking excellence, it's seeking this transformational approach, so that the students that we get, they get the most out of their way through university. Obviously, you'll have this example, for example, in terms of very prestigious university and the students that goes to very prestigious university. If you're a very prestigious university, you can choose your own students. They will be already very good students because they will have learned a lot through secondary education. They are used to study. So they will be very good students. So what's the added value of that prestigious university? Are they really bringing the students forward, or they just bring just a step forward? While a non-so prestigious university, a more local one, maybe they get not so good students for many reasons, but what they do is really help them in this transformational path. So maybe instead of going one step farther, but that's another concept of quality. And I think it's important to differentiate between these purposes of higher education and also these concepts of quality of higher education. I hope everything is clear so far. So here we have analyzed higher education, what it's for, quality of higher education, and then obviously we have to go to the concept of the students. Universities are not research centers. If we don't have education in a university, then it's purely a research center, and this is what we are not for. So therefore, what makes us different, it's the students, and therefore the role of students in our universities. And here we have again another dichotomy, and this is not just white or black. There are many shades of gray, and even there are many colors on this. But I'm trying to bring you into different streams in order for you to understand how we find this balance. And obviously, the role of students here, you can have students understood as partners, as agents, as co-creators of their education, but also of the higher education institution themselves, or a more client and user approach. I'm using both terms here because you can have a client approach when the students are paying for high fees and the student is a client, and you can find this in the Anglo-Saxon context, or the user approach, where this is more into the systems where universities are paid by the state, and the students are obviously not a client, but sometimes they are perceived just as a user. without further rights. Okay, so it's very user focused, that's great. But it's not the same to be an active agent within the institution than just to be a user of a service. And worldwide, but especially in Europe, we have been talking many times and many years about the concept of student-centered learning and teaching as one of the main missions of higher education. Here I'm highlighting a very old text, or what will be a very old text nowadays, which is not so old, which is a declaration made by the European Ministers of Higher Education, where this concept was a little bit revolutionary back then, but it was not introduced into many contexts and legislative approaches until much later on. And it's the concept of student-centered learning, which requires, as you can see in the text, empowering individual learners by new approaches to teaching and learning, effective support, guidance structures, and curriculum focus more clearly on the learner at all 3 cycles. So here's like the student-centered learning is not just about, okay, how is teaching performed in this teaching and learning process, is also what it goes all around. So the guidance structures, the support structures, the services that are provided to students to actually be responsible or co-responsible of their education. It requires flexible and more individually tailored approach paths. But the main focus, and this is why I wanted to put to focus on this text, is also because what we are looking for is to improve the end result, to improve the quality of their study programs at their level, to improve the quality of what their students will learn, this added value that they will get going through university. Because otherwise, they could go through many other types of education where they will get an education and that's all. But the part of higher education is to be this, getting this co-responsibility, this transversal competencies that will make them all of the different purposes that we saw back a couple of slides back. I don't know if many of you have ever played this game. It is a board game. I got the Ticket to Ride Europe, but there is Ticket to Ride Worldwide, Ticket to Ride America. Probably you have heard about it. It's a very simple board game. You can see here, you have a set of railways. Don't focus on where the cities are located because this is horrible, but yeah, this is a board game where you have different cities, and what the players get are the cards that you see on the left-hand side. So your mission is to go from Athens to Vilnius, for example, as you can see in the main one. The thing here is this is a learning outcome in a way. This is a planned learning outcome. You have to get from Athens to Vilnius. Obviously, you can go straight forward and trying to get the more straight line. And maybe many students will be able to do that. But also, as you can see, you can take different routes because you learn in different ways, because your personal circumstances are not allowing you to go straight forward, because you have to drop from a school, because you have somebody to take care of, or because you need money in order to continue. And as you can see, you can go from Athens to Vilnius in a very straight line through Sofia, Bucharest, Kiev, and Vilnius, or you can go all around, going maybe through Vienna, or you can go through Constantinople, going a little bit back and forth, or many different routes. So that's why I like to use this example as a learning process, because sometimes it's not as straightforward as many people want to think. And therefore, also it's important to know that you get to Vilnius, but also how you get there. And how you get there will influence also on the added value it's given to you by that education. Sometimes it's interesting to get it as fast as possible, but sometimes it's good to deviate a little bit because the competencies you will get through going through other places, you won't get it if you go through the straightforward line. This is an example I've been using for many times. And this is what I designed as a plan, a study program. Okay, so you have an entry level, you have a graduation point. The S's are the students, and then you have all around the learning environment. So the teaching staff, the learning resources, the student support systems, libraries, classrooms, online support, all the different environment, and also how it links obviously to research activities, because that's important for the future, and that's also why higher education is different from other levels of education. And therefore you have a study programs that has planned a set of, okay, I need this kind of entry level, or I'm going to start from this point, and I want to bring a student from this point to this point. And that's already a different concept of what education used to be 30 years ago. Because 30 years ago is like, I don't care about my students. I want to teach this. I want them to be able to. I'm able to teach this point, and I want them to be able to understand what I'm teaching. Now the process is more designed into the students, and this is typical, as I said, plan a study program with an entry level, with a graduation point, and here is what I want the students to get. Normally, and that's the point of student-centered learning, it's going beyond the normal, but normally the students will enter more or less all of them at the same entry level, more or less, as I said. There might be students that, because of they have been working beforehand, or because they went to education and they dropped down, but they are getting back, they might not enter at the entry level. They might enter already way through the study program, because they got a recognition process that recognize that this student already has, let's say, half of the competencies I'm aiming for in this study program. More than half of the learning outcomes I intended, this student has already got them. So why the hell should I put this student at the very beginning? Why is not better to have a recognition process? We'll situate this student in the middle, and we'll go through the remaining internal learning outcomes that were planned for that study program. So the students will start to go through the study program, and little by little going successful or not in their study experience. Different paths, different ways, different speeds. Here, what I wanted to highlight is that the basic requirement in a way is like they will get to the internet or will go over the intended learning outcomes. But there will be other learning outcomes that might have not been planned, that they will appear because there are different study routes, the different interactions with different students, the environment, even a pandemic will give them competencies that were not planned in the study program, but nevertheless, they will get them. And for my understanding, from my personal point of view, it's also important to recognize and to transcribe those learning outcomes that were not planned, that were not intended, but they were achieved into their transcripts, into their certificates, because that will give information for going into further education, but also to future employers about what those students are able or competent to do. And those will be translated into what we call a diploma supplement or a diploma certificate, depending on the context. In Europe, there has been this process that we call the Bologna process that we're aiming to define at European higher education area. And sorry for focusing a little bit on the Europe context here, but I think it's important. Sometimes many colleagues look at Europe as a very comprehensive, harmonized, very integrated region of the world. But it was not the case. Certainly, it is not to the extent many we would like to see it, but it was not the case many years ago or a few years ago. So the Bologna process, what it tried is to develop a toolbox, a set of tools that will be able for our higher education systems to talk to each other, but most importantly, to trust each other, because there was also a degree of lack of trust, let's say, or not officially lack of trust, but I will not fully trust other systems because I won't be able to understand them. If I'm not able to understand you, maybe it's also creating lack of trust or not so deep trust as I will need in order to get these recognition processes working. So you have there a set of tools where you have, for example, a qualification framework where we say, okay, this is a bachelor degree for us, this is a master's degree for us, and this is let's say a PhD degree for us. This is what it means. Those are the learning outcomes, which is another tool that the students at this level should get. And for all of us, a master's degree will be this, and a bachelor degree will be of this level. Then there are different countries where they have understood, okay, for me, a bachelor degree means this, as we agreed. But for me, for getting a bachelor degree, you need 4 years, while in other countries, they need 3. This is a little bit of not fully working system, but I mean, it could happen that the learning outcomes might be different in that case. But the overall learning outcomes for that level should be of this type. Then you have the cycle system, which goes together with the qualification framework, as I said. So we created this 3 cycle system, which is quite a standard throughout the world, but for Europe, it was a little bit not the case. So where we create this bachelor, master, and PhD. And now also we have a source cycle within the bachelor cycle also. And also is the whole discussion, for example, about where the micro-credentials fit. And this is also making work this cycle system between the qualification frameworks and leveling up this according to the learning outcomes. Then we have the ECTS, which is the European Credit Transfer System, which is some sort of a common currency. I like to make this comparison because it's easier to understand. In Europe, we had many different currencies in the different countries, and we were able to pay with this currency. But if you would like to go from one country to another, you will have to exchange, and therefore it will be complicated. And sometimes you will not understand fully how much you are paying for a service or a burger in a country or another, because you could not fully understand the payment in your own currency. So what we said is that same, we created the euro, we created a credit system, which will mean all universities within Europe should be working with this credit system. And we also will be able to understand what a degree is, how much effort in terms of a student effort will require. And therefore we will be able also to recognize that effort, that learning outcomes into the different diplomas and in the different recognition systems. And then we try to develop a diploma supplement. We were unable to develop a joint diploma, let's say, a joint template for diploma, but what we defined was a supplement. So together with your diploma, you will get a supplement which is standardized, which uses the same format throughout the different countries in Europe, and it has some information that will be standardized. So if you move from one country to another country, the people will be able to understand, to read that document, even if your certificate is different. It's some sort of a passport, okay? So in the passport, we all get the same information in the standardized format. You get your name, your surname, where you have been born, etc., etc. So this is something similar. And this is actually what makes recognition possible. Makes recognition possible because we achieved level of trust. So you have the learning outcomes, the qualification frameworks, and quality assurance working together to create trust. So quality assurance actually just checks that the learning outcomes that are achieved for a particular cycle are according to what was intended and are also according to their level within the qualification framework, and so on and so forth. And that gets what I normally call the holy trinity of recognition working. Without those 3 pieces, the system will break because there will not be trust, there will be not accountability, and the people will not be able to understand exactly what we are getting exactly in that certificate universities are issuing. This is also supported by some sort of a legal commitments that our governments have signed. You might know there is the UNESCO recognition conventions, and they were made at the very initial as a regional conventions. So each region, because it will be easier within each region to understand the system. So the European region, the Latin American region, the African region, the Southeast Asia region, etc., will get their conventions according to their systems and will facilitate these recognition processes. Now, UNESCO recently also launched a global recognition convention, which is trying to go beyond this regional approach, because nowadays, compared to the time where these different regional conventions were developed, the world is more interlinked, it's more interconnected, and it's easier to understand, it's easier to create that level of trust. And there are basic concepts as the concept of substantial difference. So it's not that you get to your university and they start reading the study program and they say, okay, but you have not been taught about this particular thing in this particular lecture. It's like, okay, overall, there is not substantial difference that will keep me from recognizing your degree with my degree because there is little difference. Also that the process are timely, that for example, in case of refugees, if you are fleeing from Ukraine, from Kiev, when they were bombarding your home, probably the last thing you think about, it's going to take the papers from your university when you are fleeing your home. You will get the few things you have at your hand and run. So also in the case of refugees, there is a process where we should assure recognition even if they don't have documentation to prove it. So the countries are responsible for setting up recognition procedures for those refugees that have been having to flee the country and they cannot prove through documents that they have achieved a certain level of higher education. That goes through different processes, but important is that the process is there and also that it's as smooth as possible. But recognition is key, because otherwise we will get people losing all the qualifications, not losing them because they will have achieved it, but not being able to transmit this to a future employer, to a future higher education institution in terms of continuing. And instead of starting, for example, as the example I used before, instead of starting at the mid of the study program, they will have to entry at the very entry level, and that's also not worthy, not fair, and not even economically sustainable for the system. Just a few words about how higher education quality assurance works in Europe. And I use this Matriovska example where the main key, the core, is the learning and teaching process. So the study programs, the linked with research, this student-centered learning approach, the assessment and certification of those achieved learning outcomes. And I always talk about achieved learning outcomes because they may be intended or not. The recognition of those learning outcomes, of those competencies, but also that you have sufficient quality staff in terms of numbers, but also in terms of qualification of that teaching staff. The learning resources available for the students, I told you about beforehand, library, online resources, study rooms, etc., etc. But also student support services, because it will be university, you have to have a whole system around you. If you don't have enough support services, it will make you more difficult to actually go through it. And that's a matter of equity and fairness. So this should be checked by internal procedures within each higher education institution. So internal quality assurance procedures. So different procedures that each university has developed, has put in place in order to check these points. Then what we went is a level over where we have external quality agencies and external quality assurance procedures that check that we have internal quality procedures that work. So you can see the internal check that the learning process is working, the external check that the internal quality assurance processes are working. And then we have a third level, which is this quality assurance agency, which are making those quality assurance procedures, external quality assurance procedures working. And we wrap everything up into this policy framework that we call the European Standards and Guidelines. And we have a register. So the agencies will have to go through even an evaluation to check that they are working according to this European agreement. And if they work according to the European agreement, if they are doing external quality assurance according to this ESGs, if they are checking that the procedures are actually aiming to check that internal quality assurance procedures work according to this policy document, then they get to register in this European Quality Assurance Register. And these agencies are able to operate throughout Europe because we have agreed in these common standards, and therefore we don't care if it is a Finnish agency, if it is an Austrian agency, if it is a Spanish agency, or at least that should be the purpose. We are still far from reality. In many countries, this is still not possible, but that's the aim. Little by little, building trust. And that brings me to the core of what I wanted to talk to you about today. It was not just about mobility, it was not just about recognition, and it was not just about quality assurance. It's also about internationalization. And this is also what we started, if you remember. Internationalization of higher education is understood as the intentional process. So it has to be intentional. In some cases, it could be non-intentional, but if it's actually working, it should be intentional, of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, functions, and delivery of, in this case, higher education, in order to enhance quality of education and research for all students and staff, and to make a meaningful contribution to society. So 3 main ideas here. The process should be planned and purposeful. So it should be actually within the strategies, it should be within the aims of the way of working of the higher education institution. Therefore, should be checked, should be renewed. Students will be participating in this defining and redefining and tailor-making process. Also, it should be more inclusive because sometimes internationalization is perceived as mobility, and many times as mobility for a few, for those who can pay it. So it should be more inclusive, less elitist, and that the abroad component should be an integral part of an internationalized curriculum for all students. So it's not just about those who could be mobile, sometimes because they can pay it, or nowadays where in some parts we have very generous grants. So even those who cannot afford it will be able to afford it because of these grants. But also what happens with those who will be staying at home. Not all will be mobile because there are not grants for all, because even the sustainability will be impossible. So it's important also that those who stay at home get an international experience throughout. International students, other international students coming, international teachers, collaboration nowadays that is much more into our daily lives in terms of hybrid formats, and so on and so forth. So that we teach also concepts and approaches from other schools, not just from the schools within our countries or our systems or within our regions. And last but not least, and I would say the most important one, it's a mean to enhance quality and go beyond and within and beyond the institution. So internationalization is not just because of mobility, it's also to enhance the quality of their education, of the added value for all the students that are within our institutions, but also beyond. So that means that also we collaborate with universities, we collaborate with the schools, we collaborate with society in order to go beyond of what we have now. So it's just not focused solely on economic rationales. And I think that's important. And that brings me to my actual work nowadays. And as Carmen was introducing me, I'm working into Arqus as Consortium Manager. And Arqus is the European University Alliance of 9 universities at the moment. This is a process that was launched by the European Commission a few years ago. It was because of an idea of the French President Macron, where he envisioned a truly European university. So what the Commission started to do is, okay, let's pilot this idea. This idea goes, in order for you to understand me, into creating some sort of a federation of universities. So existing universities are already working, bringing together in order to do something beyond what they are doing right now. So creating a meta university, a federal university with campuses in all where all universities are, but with its own educational offer. And this is what we are trying to do within Arqus. Arqus was one of those selected universities. You can see the map of what we have now. You can see we are throughout Europe. And we are, in terms of universities, we are comprehensive universities. So that means that we teach humanities, health sciences, engineering, hard sciences, etc., etc. We are research intense universities, all of us. And also we have intense experience in terms of international projects and together, but sometimes in tandems, but no as a whole. Now is the first time that we are working all 9 together, and also that have deep regional engagement because we are based in general in medium-sized cities. So universities that are comprehensive, that are research intense, but also that are very linked to their societies, to their regions. And you can see also there the focus areas where we are trying to work. So widening access, inclusion and diversity, student-centered frameworks for quality learning, multilingual and multicultural university, entrepreneurial university and regional engagement, research support and early stage researchers, the concept of citizens, in this case framed into engaged European citizens, and research and innovation policies attached. We are not there yet. This is a long process, and what we are doing now is finishing the phase 1. We are finishing the foundations. We have been working together for 3 years, and we have laid the foundations of what we actually want to be. But so far in these 3 years, and also because of the pandemic, we have just been focusing into set strong foundations from which we can build an actual university, European university. We will soon enter into this phase 2, which is erecting the pillars, erecting the building itself, where we are going beyond what we are doing right now. Now we were piloting things like creating a joint degree, a joint master degree, piloting smooth mobility with full recognition. So we are going to tailor, make more clear, more easier, less procedural wise. So little bit going to actual institutionalize those things we were doing. And then the phase 3, which we'll hope that it will happen very soon, is to have ready that actual federal university with campuses throughout Europe, where students will be able to move openly and without barriers. This is our mission statement. I will just bring you to a couple of things that I think that are important according to what I was trying to explain beforehand. With this the vision, so that we are forward-looking, open, integrated, research-driven European university, building transformational excellence with and for all. And I think you can find here our understanding of this balance of the purposes of higher education that we talked about at the very beginning. Our mission is to transform European higher education, research and innovation through a deep cooperation and progressive integration in the pursuit of an equitable and sustainable future by educating critical and socially engaged European citizens, so students at the very, very front, equipped with lifelong learning, leaving no one behind, generating excellent, open, talent-based, innovative, and reflective knowledge. This is the broadening of the knowledge base that I told you about before. Acting as committed, multi-level societal and global player, and bringing down barriers for effective cooperation. And our values, obviously, that are very much interlinked to the different integration process we have in Europe, which obviously are the values of democracy, rule of law, respect for diversity, human rights, solidarity, and the pursuit of peace and justice in Europe and the world. We are trying also not to be very Eurocentric, as you can see, but also because of being supported by European Commission money, Europe has to be highlighted many times. That the core university values are expressed in the Magna Carta Universitatum, where many of the universities worldwide have subscribed. And in terms of academic freedom, freedom of assembly of the students, institutional autonomy, and so on and so forth. That also we believe the unique role played by universities as open places of freedom, pluralism, democratic participation dedicated to the generation and dissemination of knowledge through research, education, innovation, and culture for sustainable societal progress. The shared understanding that higher education as a public good and a public responsibility. So the colleagues from ESU probably will be knowing where this comes from, which serves the purposes of individual, social, economic, and cultural development. Again, going back to the purposes of higher education, and the conviction that through our alliances, people and institutions are stronger in the pursuit of the common good. Last but not least, here you can see the major goals that we have set up ourselves for 2032, which, as you can see, is actually building that federal university that will be barrier-free, where students will be free to move, that will engage with society, that will cooperate with many universities and regional structures of authorities, that will be working as a sandbox to pilot, to go beyond, to do new things, to engage with communities, to be intercultural, to be more flexible and talents-driven, and bring this transformational approach not only for the universities participating within Arqus, but also to sharing this experience with the rest of the system, and to enhance intercultural competence, global understanding, and the respect for diversity through our communities. What we have been doing so far, and I'm coming to an end, I promise, it's these main 6 areas where we have been focusing on the staff. So pedagogical training for staff, both teaching and admin staff, for further development of the professionalization, and that goes from multicultural courses, language courses, pedagogical courses, etc., etc. Fostering joint research, so we are trying to also support PhD candidates, but also bringing them together, giving them support to travel, to get to know other colleagues, and also to promote their challenge-based approach. We are trying to develop joint programs. As I said at the very beginning, we focus on master's programs, but also at all 3 cycles, and including micro-credentials and short modules. Open mobility, which was a reality since the very beginning. So any students from any of our universities will be free to move to any other universities and get their study periods abroad fully recognized at their home university. But also for staff and teaching and admin staff, but also for internships, also for virtual exchange, also for hybrid formats. We are also trying to develop common understandings, so common policy, common stance points in terms of gender equality, inclusion, sustainable development goals, recognition of non-formal and informal learning, language policies, research impact, so on and so forth. But also sharing resources, sharing research infrastructure. If we have a super computer in Granada that our colleagues in Graz might not have it, we will give them rights to use it. And on the contrary, if Granada has not a cyclotron, but the colleagues in Lyon, they have it, colleague from Granada will be able to travel to Lyon and go and use that infrastructure for their research. So we will pull together our resources in order to have a better university and a better research. but also the ECTS catalogs, the virtual courses, the learning object repository, the language trainings, the incubators, all the support environment that we were talking about also for the students. So as you can see, it's a huge endeavor, but also very, I will say, very worth one. I will stop in this very last slide for a minute. This is our governance structure. I don't want to focus very much here, but I want to highlight, for me, it's important that we have a student council, which is made out of the different student unions or student councils from the different universities, that they participate in all decision-making processes. They have a seat in the steering committee where they vote as if they will be a university part of the alliance. So they have full rights and they have the same voting rights as any other university. But also they sit at the rectors council and they discuss with the rectors, they sit with the vice rectors and they discuss with the vice rectors. And they also participate at the different policy implementation levels of all different boards we have. So as you can see, we tried not only to preach about the importance of active European citizens and how important the students are, but also by engaging them in the governance of our structures, because this is also important. And they have been extremely active in contributing both to the implementation of this first phase, we are coming to an end, but also in the design of the next ones and in the design of the mission statement I just read to you. So I will stop here. I will just like to thank you very much for your patience, for also the technical problems. And I'm looking forward for any question, comment, or any debate you would like to launch. Thank you very much. And back to you, Seb, Carmen.
Thank you a lot, Fernando. That was very insightful. I don't know if any participant has any questions. You can just take the floor. I don't see any so far. I was wondering, Fernando, since you've been explaining the different stages of the Bologna processes and how things were evolving in Europe, what would be like if something like this would be kind of replicated or try to be implemented in any other continent, from your experiences, in which kind of area should students focus when lobbying for, like, I don't know, better access or more quality of education or improvement in mobility? What would be like your kind of points to really lobby for?
I think it will depend very much on the region and how the different cooperation arrangements have been set up in the different regions. Latin America has an Ibero-American space, which is not so much of a full success yet, but they are working on it. So I think it's quite important, and they have already a good base. Also, in Africa, there are strong movements into creating this kind of similar processes as we did in Europe. So those are very good paths. I think it's important for the students to be there, to be present. I think also it's worth to mention to the colleagues from other regions that the European Student Union, ESU, was not invited. It simply was not invited at the very beginning to the Bologna process. But we managed to get, or the colleagues back then managed to get a seat by insistence, talking to the governments and saying, like, guys, please, you cannot do this without the students. And ESU has been extremely valuable and has been recognized by all partners, by the universities, by the governments later on, that obviously made sense that the students were there. So first, I think it's ask for your seat on the table, because that will make a difference, that nothing is designed without you. My second advice is don't focus just about mobility. I think that has been a huge error sometimes for the European cooperation. Erasmus has been a great program, but the success of Erasmus is not because of people being mobile itself, it's because having the international experience. And you can get that international experience through many other ways. And I think that's important, that we just not focus on mobility. Mobility is important, And it helped Europe a lot. And ESU was very important in setting a target in order also to go beyond this concept of mobility for a few lucky ones. So ESU was the one that proposed the 20% target of mobility students with a mobile experience by the end of their degree by 2020, and that pushed a lot the government in order to achieve that target. Which is great. I think targets are good to push governments towards, but this will not be the end. This will be a mean. And I think those are the important ones. And the second is mechanisms to build trust. Maybe it has not to be a standardized mechanism as a credits in unique credit system will be great. In Europe has worked to such an extent. But the important part is like you are able to build trust within the different systems, within the different countries. And sometimes in some countries are different because how the different structures have been organized, especially when you have private sector into higher education, and that creates universities of a not so good reputation, and that keeps back a little bit the governments from other countries to trust that system. So quality assurance mechanisms are important, also are a key place for students to be very active. ESU has been very smart also on that. And being on the quality assurance processes, it helps and legitimizes the students to change the system, to change how study programs work, to change how the different universities are evaluated, and even to get the students to be seated again at the tables. I was as evaluator in many systems where students were not simply into the quality assurance mechanisms, and we were going there and we were saying, look, you cannot do that quality assurance without the students on the table, at the table, sorry. So obviously, this is also something very important. It may be very bureaucratic sometimes. It may be perceived as a very bureaucratic that you're not getting somewhere, but this is a long-term bet. So if you are able to get the students there slowly, little by little, that will change the system.
Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone else has a question. Otherwise, I might have another one. I don't see any so far. So I'm going to ask you another question, Fernando.
Sure.
What do you think about the UNESCO's Global Recognition Convention? And like, do you think that its implementation it's really gonna like change things, or what kind of influence or changes are gonna come together with this convention?
Well, first thing is like we are in the right moment. The recognition conventions, the regional recognition conventions were mainly a big fail when they were developed. Even the European one, it worked more or less, but it was not until it was revised in 1997 that it actually started to work. In the recent years, we have been the different regional conventions being revised, and that I think they are revitalizing them. The Southeast Asia, the African convention have this also revised recently, or not so recently, but a few years ago. And I think those regional conventions are the basis for the global one, but should be not excluding each other, so that the global one should be able to work even if the regional convention is not working in some regions. And also the added value is that higher education is not performed as it was done 50 years ago. And we have seen this also over the pandemic. The access to information, the role of the teachers, the role of the students also are different. And the ways we learned also are different. And therefore, this global convention is changing a little bit that concept. The success, the main factor of success is to getting enough countries signing up for it. So committing to actually use that convention. We all need to push our countries to get to sign and ratify the convention, but also simple concepts of the substantial difference. It helps a lot, and getting that into our legislation is very important. Even the European Convention, as I said, even the revised one, has not been working for certain aspect. The Article 7 for refugees, in some countries, they even had legislation against it. Countries that signed and ratified the convention. So legally, they were going into a huge mess. But those are tools that are helping, are being very useful for the students and the student movements and the student unions to push for them and saying, it's not just me that I'm asking for this. Is in this global convention is giving you more arguments in order to push for these recognition processes.
Thank you very much. If we don't have any other questions, I think we can close here. I think it was very clear, Fernando.
Cool. Thank you very much. I mean, I remain at your disposal. If by any chance you keep to follow up the discussion, I will be more than happy to do so. So yeah, best of luck also with the continuation of the Academy. I think that I must congratulate you all for this initiative. It's excellent. And I hope it will be having a second edition soon as well.
We're already working on it. So
great.
So yeah, thank you very much again for being with us today. It was really nice. And of course, for any other future adventures, we will keep you in the list of very dear friends and colleagues.
Feel free. I'm always happy to do so. So thank you very much, colleagues. Have a nice day.